talk about that. We're a couple days away, or a little over a week away from the NHRA Spring Nationals. This is an especially significant happening in the world of drag racing because, by all accounts, Mike, JT, this will be the last time the NHRA visits Houston Raceway Park. It was for a short period known as Royal Purple Raceway. Down there in Baytown, Texas, outside the metropolis that is Houston, Texas, man, one of the biggest markets in the country, a really, really strong car culture and racing fan base. Stings a little bit, pulls on the heartstrings to think about there not being a spring nationals.
Yes, and they were talking about it in the NHRA virtual press conference that I was in the other day, and like, is Erica? She was 8 years old the first time she ever went down that track. So.
Hometown track
also,
for the Enders family.
We also heard, some of these drivers were talking about, like, say you did good at this track. You always, like, well, let's say Erica at Vegas, or I think Tony was talking about that he did good at Houston,
Tony
or Atlanta actually, and he was saying that you do good at these tracks for so long, and then they take that track away from you. Well, that's one of the tracks that we performed at. We've never really talked about that aspect of it either.
No, I mean, and I think Houston's one of those tracks that I think was either a track. I mean, I think a lot of sportsman racers, they'd be like, oh man, it's always wet. I end up getting parked in the mud somewhere or whatever. But like a lot of pro level racers that aren't fighting those battles, they look forward to going to Houston. You're racing basically at sea level. The track's fast. Typically a big crowd, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of activations. The Angel family, I think, has done a really solid job with that facility over the years, just creating big events, creating an air of a big event when you're on the property there. And personally, man, I've got like 10,000 really good memories from Houston. And it's weird. I feel like in some ways, like some of the Drag Illustrated journey, some of it's connected to Houston.
Absolutely. Man.
You know what I mean? Like some of it really is connected to that event, whether it was ADRL Drag Palooza, which I think Drag Illustrated was the title right sponsor of somehow.
Illustrated Drag Palooza. Clearly that I don't know how that got past the branding department, but somehow we let that go. Drag Illustrated.
Well, I think what happened was I showed up and our logo was on the shirts and tickets. And Kenny Nowling was like, hey, congrats, man. You're the title right sponsor of the race. And I'm like, oh, rad. Okay.
And then you kind of lean into it, right? Because the place is packed and you're like, yep, we put on. I
still have tickets.
Probably the most well-attended drag race in the history of Houston Raceway Park was a Drag Illustrated event. I can remember that because that you and I were kind of just getting started at that point. Man. And I'm like, this dude is for real. Now he's out here sponsoring ADRL events. Like this guy is crazy, but he's not messing around.
You were bamboozled.
You were bamboozled. Yep. That's a fact.
And then my old man proceeded to go Tony Hawk off the right guard wall at about right before the 8th mile in 2009, airborne in the 55 Chevy.
That was a rough, man.
Wheel goes 800 feet in the air and like runs down that like gully or whatever that goes between the track and the return road, like all the way down to the shutdown. Wild deal. You had just gotten a new Drag Illustrated 4Runner. Here, this man's rolling in a brand new 4Runner with Drag Illustrated decal on the side. Again, bamboozling everybody.
Yeah, and that was one of the best deals I've ever
made. I needed to take my old man to the hospital. He's got a broken back, we think. I'm having a fight to get him to even
he didn't want to go.
He didn't want to go. And I said, well, I'll drive you. And Wes is like, take my car. Which if you know Wes, Wes is like full stop, like probably the most like generous and eager to help someone in a bad situation person that I think that most of us know. So the fact that he's handing me the keys to this brand new vehicle that he had just gotten and was so proud of, was like, drive your dad to the hospital.
I don't even know how we got to the hotel.
It was your first date, right?
Yeah, with my now wife.
Your now wife, Alicia.
Yeah.
First time we had met her, and then here you are handing the keys to your vehicle over to some person.
Yeah. And I think she looked at me and she was like, hey, how are we going to get back to the hotel? And I'm like, I don't know. Somebody will take us, you know?
I told her to run.
Yeah.
So that was an auspicious start for that relationship.
Dude, that Well, I will tell you that felt like a make or break moment for my marriage or for the relationship, because I asked her, I remember it very well. I called her and I was like, "Hey, you want to go to the races with me this weekend?" And she's like, "Yeah." And we'd been on one date prior to that. We'd been out to eat, and I said, "You want to go?" And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, that sounds like fun. Where's it at?" I'm like, "Houston." And she's like, "Texas?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." She's like, "Well, how are we going to get there?" I'm like, "Drive." She's like, "Well, isn't that like a long way?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's like 18 hours one way." And she's like, "Oh, oh,
Average for
okay,
a Midwestern.
okay."
Never trust driving time calculations from a Midwestern person,
Oh my
because
God.
their map is just
Oh, dude, I was so
skewed.
tired. I remember this vividly, and I'll tell you this story briefly. But so she agreed to go, and I remember her mom, my mother-in-law now, told her, "If you guys make it through this weekend, you're good." Like, if I don't think
Smart.
Alicia prior to that time had like never been in the car longer than 4 or 5 hours. So this was I'd spent my entire life in the cab of a truck, so it was not a big deal to me at all. And I worked all week. We were working on the magazine. We were up against deadline, if I remember correctly. And I mean, I'd hardly slept. And Thursday rolls around, and I'm like, "Hey, we need to get on the road. I want to be there for first round." So we start driving, and I'm like, "Hey," she goes, "Well, how are we gonna like drive halfway and stop?" And I'm like, "No, we're gonna drive there, now, like right now, and we'll get there 18 hours from now. That's what the GPS says." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And I remember rolling through. We were just north of Oklahoma City on I-35, and I'm getting tired. Like my eyes are getting heavy, and I've got the windows down, music blaring, doing anything I can to stay awake, right? And I finally tell Alicia, like, "Hey, listen, if you'll drive," and I mean, look at me expecting this of my, I barely know this chick, right? I go, "Listen, could you drive for like an hour? Like, it's just straight. We're on I-35 till Dallas, basically. Just drive straight. Let me sleep for like an hour. If I can just close my eyes and catch my breath for a second, I'll drive us the rest of the way." So she's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. That's fine. I'd love to. And we were in a brand new Toyota 4Runner, so she's excited to drive it. So we pull over to the side of the road. She hops in behind the wheel, and I'm like out before we're still going over the rumble strips, and I'm sawing logs, right? I wake up like halfway, I don't know, 45 minutes later or whatever. And I kind of just look over, and Alicia's over there, singing, belting out like the greatest hits of Spice Girls, "If you want to be my lover," and I'm like, "Oh, she's cute," and I kind of close my eyes, and then I feel the sensation of leaning forward. And I'm like, "What the fuck?" And I open my eyes, and we're stopping at a stop sign. And I'm like, there are no stop signs on I-35. Like, there is no reason in the world we should be stopping. And I look around, and we're in a neighborhood. Like, and she's just rocking out. And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, where are we?" She's like, "I don't know. You said keep driving straight." I'm like, "Well, you clearly didn't. Like, where are we?" "I don't know." So I start kind of getting the lay of the land. We're in a neighborhood in Oklahoma City. We're just literally, she did not take the exit, which I should have told her to stay south on I-35. She headed direct into Oklahoma City, and now we're in a neighborhood. Like, we're literally, like, there's multiple stop signs in front of us. And while I got frustrated slightly, not bad, I was like, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay." And I'm thinking to myself, like, "Oh my God, if I hadn't just met you, I'd be busting the windows out of this thing right now." But anyways, I took over driving, drove us the rest of the way, nearly died. It was a rough deal. But Houston is, and I think a lot of people have stories like that about certain tracks or certain trips. And I just feel like Houston, for me, has been one that there's almost always some crazy story or some crazy memory that is associated with that track. And just like I feel about some of the other places that have closed down or gone away, it just rips my freaking heart out. Like, as excited as I am about the NHRA Spring Nationals coming up, I can't help but I have to admit that I'm also equally bummed out that this is likely the last time that an NHRA national event will roll through the gates of that facility. I can't count the number of times I've rolled through the gate there, parked by the little black trailer out front, and it's the same people. It's a great scene. And it really will be a bummer for that
The tree. There's an iconic tree
yes,
in the
an
staging
iconic tree in the
lanes.
staging
Yeah,
lanes,
you
man.
can catch some shade, usually some much needed shade if you're there anytime other than the spring or the fall. But
it's such a great place, man. It's going to be weird. I mean, I think we should have at some point, I don't know that today is the day, because we're going to reflect and reminisce a little bit about the magic that has been Houston Raceway Park for all these years. But I think we're at some point going to have to explore how in the hell a situation can exist where it makes sense not to have an NHRA national event. I don't think that has ever, I don't know that that's ever been a conversation that's been had openly, because for as long as I can remember, every track owner, the dream was to have an NHRA national event. Like, we're going to do all this, but man, if only we could turn this 8th mile track into a quarter mile and build some luxury suites and expand the parking. What we really want is an NHRA national event.
We've seen it go the other way, though. Now we've seen these other things. We've seen like the Stampede of Speed. We've seen like concerts, lantern releases, or whatever they call that.
Yeah. Texas 2K, music 2K, festivals, you know.
Yeah. These other things that these venues that are surviving or thriving are doing outside of not only a national event, but their traditional drag racing program as well. And I think that is something that's like the dark side of the story that we don't really want to talk about. But how did it get to that point, especially when it comes to an NHRA national event, as you're saying? But we've got several of these tracks. I mean, and we're definitely going to go down memory lane with Houston, but Memphis International Raceway, the Midwest Drag Racing Series, is headed there. Is it this weekend or
next weekend?
Yeah, this is Easter weekend. So next weekend. And that's going to be the final race at that track, from what I understand. So again, now we've lost Houston, Memphis, and we were just talking about Palm Beach. No Prep Kings was in Palm Beach this past weekend, and they're like petitioning to try to save that track. But it, from all accounts that I can find online, is headed for demolition. Like,
that's my understanding, man. I mean, and
so you've got South Florida. You've got Memphis, you know, Tennessee, Midwest area there. Houston, which I believe is the 3rd largest metro in the country. Or it's up there. Top 5. Chicago, which may be the 3rd. Is Joliet. We've heard about rumors about it getting reinvigorated. But how does NHRA, we talk about these national events and the track owners, you know, that business model changing, but how can NHRA not have events in these major markets? It seems
especially when they've like
got to get replaced.
They've done everything to get like near New York, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic to see what's gone on with the New England Nationals, right? It's a great thing, but by all accounts, like, that facility is relatively small. There's traffic issues getting into it every year, which makes for some great photos. But it was like, we're willing to do anything to be close to that, you know, Boston, New York market or whatever. And I think that experience and that experiment, has paid dividends for the NHRA. By everybody that I've talked to, that's a very successful event. People are excited about it. The local fan base is rabid for it. But to your point, Mike, I can't imagine how we can allow there to be it's even worse. It would be easier if Houston Raceway Park was going to go away. Do you agree? Like, if we knew that track was closing,
that's the more interesting aspect of it.
That's the real story, that it's going to stay open. They are just opting not to have an NHRA national event. I mean, that's that's a conversation that I had.
There's a lot of factors that go into that too. Fan attendance, racer attendance, the schedule, the weather, you know, how
what did he tell you, Wes?
Man, he basically just told me that the value proposition wasn't what it once was. And, you know, that he's an avid supporter of the NHRA. The NHRA Spring Nationals have been happening at Houston Raceway Park for 35 years, man, 3.5 decades.
We've been seeing these tracks, though, just packed full of people. I mean,
yeah, I
expect the event in Houston to be huge, considering
it's already sold out.
Yeah,
it's already sold out.
I think it's going to be bananas, but is it not going to be hard to be there and look around at the stands full of people and the pits full of race cars and go, dude, we're not going to do this anymore? Like, we're just going to stop? I mean, that especially knowing that they're going to have drag races. From what I understand, and I don't know that this is like laid out anywhere in great detail, but from what I've been able to piece together via other sources, as well as going direct to Seth Angel, it's a conversation that's less than 2 weeks old. I talked to Seth And he told me that they still have every intention of hosting a lot of major independent drag racing events. Things like Texas 2K. They've got music festivals. I think there's a music festival that's going to go to HRP in the fall that they've had some tremendous success with. And that seems to be what entices him and excites him right now. And I just really find that alarming. I don't mean to be negative at all, because I'm here to say, like, we can list off. I admit that I'm not a racetrack guru to the extent that our own Van Abernathy is, Brett Kepner is, Brian Loans is, and I know that there's readily available information. If you go on Brett Kepner's Facebook account right now, pull it up, you can. Drag racing as a sport is secure. By, I think the most recent account or close to this is that there are 423 tracks, or in that area, 420 tracks that are active in the country right now, right? And that is, it's not an all-time high, which apparently was in like the mid 2000s, where there was like 440 to 450 active tracks. But when we're still living in the glory days of drag
they've
racing,
always been within a range right there, in
right,
100 to 450 range or something. I forget the numbers he
it's
said.
almost always
We're
in that
right on
range.
par with it.
And apparently, according to a post I saw from Brett like a week or two ago, we're actually, since 2020, the sport of drag racing is actually 11 good. We're 11 racetracks to the good. But I think it's not, I don't want to necessarily talk about track closures and stuff, because I think there's a certain amount of that that's just, we can't change. You mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Property values are insane.
They are.
How are we going to condemn? I mean, I hate it. It sucks, but you understand the economics of it. And so many times in life, math is like the last word.
Right, but
you know what I mean? Math
moves in around them, and then so it's going to force that track to close. And then are you going to go build another one even further out? Until it builds out around. Here's
the follow up to that. You make a very valid point, because like right now, when a track gets encroached upon by real estate developments and commercial zoning or whatever, right, residential zoning, and they start to have issues with curfews and start to have issues with noise ordinances and all this stuff, the answer is to find somebody to buy the place for way more than it's worth, to be turned into something that's not a racing facility. Right? I mean, that's pretty much the play. That's what everybody does. And to your point, JT, no one runs out the door and looks for a parcel of land outside of town to build another racetrack. And that's what I'm talking about. It terrifies me that Houston Raceway Park is going to continue to operate, for the most part, for the foreseeable future, as a drag strip. And maybe that's all bullshit. Maybe they're going to shut the whole place down in 2 weeks. Maybe. I don't know. But from what I've been told, they have every intention of continuing to operate that facility as a racetrack to some extent. Are they going to have a weekly bracket program? I don't think so. But are they going to routinely use the place as a racetrack? Yes. And there are multiple racetracks in the United States of America, national event tracks, that are primarily used for NHRA national events. So my point is more that, how have we arrived at a point in time when a track is going to opt not to have an NHRA national event? That, and to your point, JT, I mean, like, if they were killing it and the city encroached upon them and they were printing money, they would go find another place to build a racetrack and do it again and keep it going. Yeah. But clearly that's not what's happening. So the value proposition has to be such that a track owner is willing to fight the local ordinances. They're willing to push back. They're willing to play politics or do whatever they have to do to extend their runway. And then in the event that they ultimately have to sell, or there's an opportunity to sell, I think the NHRA, the goal should be to create an environment where the Angel family, let's just use them as an example, maybe not the best one because they've been around for a long time and they've done their fair share. I don't know that the sport of drag racing can ask everyone to just stick around till they're dead. You know what I mean? It seems to be what commitment we do. It's a bit of a lifetime commitment, but I mean, they've been doing this for 35 years at an extremely high level. And I don't think anybody can really be mad at them or fault them for moving on.
I don't think that's the feeling too. I think that this is everything we've seen. I've never seen, especially from NHRA, more of a send off.
Yeah.
For never a facility. They've been posting things and sharing content for weeks. Houston memories. We've got a good list of.
But don't you think that is some extent strategic? Like, that's strategic because there's a bad side to this. A bad side, that a national event level facility that has adequate parking, has a great surface. I mean, obviously, I think improvements need to be made, whatever. I get it. And that's a whole other conversation. Track owners have to be reinvesting. They have to be improving the facilities, all these things. We've talked about them before. We'll talk about them again. But I can't help but see this. The reason NHRA is being so over the top, in my opinion, with all the press and all the publicity, obviously they've made some changes in their media department, which I think have been very, very, very positive. But also, I think they have to offset the fact that, like, the dirty secret is that this place is going to be a drag strip next April, but NHRA just ain't going to.
And how do you allow that to happen as the NHRA? Like, okay, why wouldn't you have a sit down? Like, how can we make this work and figure something out? I mean, I don't.
Hasn't this been brewing for a while though?
This happens, right?
From what we know, that this has been, I feel like this has been talked about for a number of years
the facility,
now.
I mean, I think this would have happened sooner if the Angel family and Houston Raceway Park collectively didn't have an agreement with the NHRA to run races through 2022. I think that they had some sort of agreement. I don't know, obviously, I'm just like kind of reading the tea leaves, but I think there was an agreement that we were going to have the NHRA Spring Nationals at Houston Raceway Park through 2022. They, as of this event, they will have fulfilled their obligation and they're moving on, right? And both parties
there's got to be something more to this. I think
there is. And there's something more to it, is that I think for a racetrack owner, it's a tough pill to swallow. You've got to pay all those purses. You've got to do all sorts of advertising. You've got to staff the track. How many times have you guys heard me, like, the juice is or isn't worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
Right. And I think we've arrived at a point where it's so expensive and so financially cumbersome to have an NHRA national event that you have to have 70-degree weather and sunshine, and everything has to go perfect for it to be a really big success for the track. And I think some of these track owners are going, shit, I could put on a race that pays nothing but trophies. Don't have to pay out $150,000 for top fuel, get a pretty good crowd, spend way less, have way less track prep, way less overhead. You know what I mean? And that's a precarious position for people. And now, granted, I don't think that we're going to see NHRA national events go away. That's obviously not what's happening. But I do think that in an ever-changing world, in an ever-changing media landscape, an ever-changing event landscape, you've got to change with the times and you've got to adapt your business model to the times. And I think that there's just drag strip owners and facility owners, by and large, got a lot of options. I mean, there's a freaking electric music festival popping up every other day. There's a country music, whatever, drink off coming up this weekend in Fort Worth. I mean, you can have a barbecue festival. You can do a lot of stuff, right? I mean, there's a lot of options. I mean, I went to the Fort Worth Arts Festival this past weekend in downtown Fort Worth. A drag strip could do that. I mean, you could use the drag strip as a thoroughfare and set up everybody's little display in each lane and have one long ass, main drag with no traffic and shut down no streets. I mean, there's a lot of ways to use a racetrack, right? And I just think the NHRA, their challenge and what they are faced with is they have to make their events absolute home runs, where a track gets an NHRA national event and your year is set. That's I think has to be the vision. That would be my vision. It's like an author. If you can get Oprah to put your book on her wish list or her reading list, you're a New York Times bestseller. You're set. I mean, literally, you're going to sell out of books. That's what an NHRA national event needs to represent to a track, a home run. Hey, you are one of the lucky few that are going to get an NHRA national event. When you get an NHRA national event, you get this show, this TV coverage, this type of thing, and you're going to line your pockets.
Well,
right?
It looks like this year that may be the case too.
And I hope so.
So far that we've seen at all the tracks so far.
But you have to create that environment. You have to create the pitch has to be irresistible. And I'm hearing it more and more from track owners across the country that it's getting harder to make it make sense, right? And that is, I think that's more of an issue than slowing the cars down. I think that's more of an issue than anything else, right? Is that we have to make sure that the value proposition for these track owners. I had a guy tell me one time, the most important piece of the drag racing puzzle is successful promoters, right? And I think that it's successful promoters and tracks, right? We have to have tracks winning. These guys have to be winning so that they can make some money, have some play around money, fund their own race team and the other things that they want to do with the earnings from the track, more than likely, but also have enough to reinvest in the facility, improve the bathrooms, improve the pits, pave them every once in a while, whatever the case may be. And the whole racing space needs to have wide eyes to that. It needs to be well aware that we can't just nickel and dime these. We can't expect everybody to take an L. We can't expect everybody to do it just for the good of the sport of drag racing, which I think this sport has benefited tremendously from the philanthropic efforts of passionate racers, right? I mean, we've seen Tommy and Judy Franklin come to mind. They saved Virginia Motorsports Park. Mother Nature was reclaiming that facility, right? I mean, grass was growing up, weeds were growing around the towers. The thing was in ill repair.
Now
they swoop in.
It's like certified as one of the smoothest concrete surfaces on the planet, or maybe the
Literally,
smoothest.
I think it might be the smoothest surface on the planet. So, I mean, that is a product of some successful folks that love the sport of drag racing and didn't want to see that track go away, right? And invested in it, right? And now I believe they've turned that into a profitable business.
Yeah, that's your point. It takes both of those. And we've talked about this. It takes that passion for the sport and the, financial wherewithal to be able to do it. If you're just trying to make money, there are other ways to make money. There are
easier ways to do it
with that property, with that facility. You have to have that passion. And I think that once that starts to waver, or that's gone, or people start to look at things from a different perspective and don't kind of have the blind faith in the sport that maybe they started with, you start to get things like this. And I think that just the crazy property values right now are going to make this problem. We're going to be talking about this for a while. When you've got huge swaths of land and land is becoming extremely, extremely valuable across the country. And as metro areas start to expand, we've seen this here in Charlotte, probably more than anywhere in the country. Something you built out in the woods 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, with the way it's accelerating now, is being swallowed up by these growing metro areas. Housing, and the demand for housing is growing like crazy. Where are they going to build them? Out in the suburbs or even further, where the drag strips are. Yeah. So this encroachment and this growth, if we continue to see this, and these property values are really going to sway a lot of these track owners, if they're not passionate, if they're worn out, or if they're kind of at the end of the rope with what they're doing with the sport, and someone's coming along and offering crazy money for their property,
an easy exit,
what are we going to see? We're going to see
signal
more of
they're taking their turn signals on.
Yeah.
They're taking the exit. There's no doubt in my mind.